Keanu Reeves was standing in the first-class line, dressed simply in contrast to the luxury surrounding him. A man watched him with contempt, unable to conceal his haughtiness. What transpired next would leave everyone on that plane in complete silence and alter one person's life forever. Before we continue, let us recognize where you are viewing from. If you like stories like this, please subscribe to the channel because we have another special story for you tomorrow. The Los Angeles Keanu Reeves airport was bustling as usual, with people coming and going, conversations blending together, and luggage rolling in all directions. In the midst of it all, a man. He was Keanu Reeves, and he was standing coolly in the first-class line. He was wearing a plaid shirt, faded jeans, and scuffed boots, and he had a backpack that looked like it had been around the world. He wasn't particularly noticeable, which may have contributed to his lack of attention, but anyone who looked closely could see something different. While everyone else seemed hurried and nervous, Keanu stood there calmly, taking in everything around him as if he were soaking in the moment. He didn't mind the looks or the sharp contrast between how he dressed and how calm he felt. In the line directly behind him were Victor Harding and himself. Victor was the total opposite of Keanu. He wore a pricey suit, polished shoes, and a cologne that demanded attention. Every move he made appeared to have been practiced, as if he wanted everyone to know he was someone important. His eyes swiftly swept the line, and when they found Keanu, he couldn't contain his remark. "First class," Victor said with a sardonic smile. "You never know who might show up here these days." Keanu turned to face him, maintaining a composed expression, and Victor scowled briefly. "Yes, the world is full of surprises." Victor expected a more significant response that would validate his thoughts about the man in front of him, but Keanu remained silent as if the remark didn't matter. Victor chose to go one step further, saying, "Look, nothing personal, but you don't seem like the type who flies like this," with a quiet laugh. "It's uncommon to see someone so casual in first class." When the time to board had come, the first-class line started to move forward, and Keanu and Victor took their tickets without saying anything more. Victor, as usual, walked with firm, confident strides, and Keanu appeared unaware of the chaos around him, continuing to walk at the same leisurely pace as before. Inside the plane, the unexpected happened. Victor checked his ticket again when he got to his seat, and when he looked up, he saw Keanu boarding and settling into the seat next to his. "You have to be kidding me," Victor muttered, shaking his head in shock. He sat down next to Keanu and laughed quietly, just like the. Keanu simply looked at him with that same composed manner and smiled slightly, as if we were traveling together. Then he replied politely, and Victor crossed his arms to conceal his discomfort, which went beyond simply being seated next to him. The situation was a joke of all the places that could have happened, and it had to be here. But Keanu's presence unnerved him in a way he couldn't ignore, and as the economy class passengers finished boarding, Victor decided to start a conversation, not in a friendly way, because the man he had just judged was now sharing the same exclusive space as him. "What do you do for a living?" he asked in the casual manner of someone who already believed they knew the answer but wanted to be sure. Keanu, who was rearranging his backpack beneath the seat in front of him, looked up and replied simply, "I work in film." Victor raised his eyebrows as though he was surprised. "Oh, I see, commercials, little things," and Keanu smiled slightly. "I've always thought it's fascinating how people try to find their place, but sometimes places, like first class, aren't meant for everyone." Keanu looked at him for a moment, assessing the situation, but kept his composure. Victor laughed and shook his head. Keanu responded, "We all have our place, and occasionally that's exactly where we are." Victor laughed briefly. "That's nice and even philosophical, but real life isn't that easy." Keanu didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned back to the window as though the conversation had ended, but Victor wasn't finished yet. "You know what?" Victor said, leaning slightly toward him. "You may be sitting here, but there are things that money cannot purchase, and some places will never truly belong to the people who own them." This time, Keanu didn't reply with words. Instead, he just gave him a brief look that conveyed more than words ever could. Victor realized his provocation hadn't had the desired effect, so he leaned back into his seat with a satisfied smile. The plane was already in the air, and the conversation was getting much more serious. The in-flight service started, and the flight attendant went through first class, offering drinks. Victor made sure to stand out by asking for a glass of champagne, something that would match the exclusivity of his seat, and smiled confidently. When it was Keanu's turn, the flight attendant, who was used to demanding passengers, nodded with a professional smile. Keanu made a simple request, "Just water, please." Victor didn't miss the chance to comment. He looked at Keanu with that same air of superiority and laughed softly. "Don't tell me you're going to waste the first-class experience with water?" Keanu accepted the bottle and said calmly, "I'm fine with this sometimes." Victor narrowed his eyes as if trying to figure him out. "I suppose that works for people who settle for less, but not everyone is born to enjoy the best life has to offer." Keanu lifted the bottle, took a small sip without reacting. Other passengers noticed Victor's tone. Since Keanu seemed unconcerned, no one stepped in. Keanu finally replied, "Perhaps the best is different for everyone." Victor didn't like the response. Victor inhaled deeply in an attempt to keep the conversation under control, or perhaps to continue proving a point. "Some things are out of reach for certain people," he said. The flight attendant serving another passenger glanced toward them as if wondering whether to step in but held back. Keanu smiled softly and turned his face back to the window. Victor wasn't content. He still wanted to provoke more, but something about Keanu's calmness made him harder to rattle. The flight attendant returned to the area where Keanu and Victor were seated, serving meals. Though Keanu remained composed, Victor was about to face a reality that would completely alter his perspective on people. He believed he was winning the argument, but the other passengers were growing increasingly uncomfortable with his arrogance. Victor raised his glass again, smirking. "You know," he said, waving his champagne slightly, "life is like flying first class. You work hard to earn your spot and then you get to enjoy it. But some people," he paused, "they're only here because they were fortunate." Keanu set his water bottle down on the seat tray and looked at Victor. His gaze was calm, but his tone shifted slightly. "Whether it's luck or hard work," Keanu said evenly, "we all end up in the same spot when the plane lands, don't we?" Those who had been quietly watching started to listen more intently. The cabin grew still. A few exchanged glances. Victor, trying to hide that Keanu's response had hit a nerve, chuckled softly. "I wouldn't say that. Some of us are just built differently." Keanu leaned forward slightly, crossing his arms, and gestured lightly toward the cabin. "It's not about what you have," he said, "but how you treat others." The phrase lingered in the air like a quiet challenge. Victor tried to laugh it off, but his discomfort was visible. "That's a good one. First-class self-help philosophy. Maybe you should consider giving motivational talks." Keanu gave a brief nod, not reacting to the sarcasm. Around them, some passengers exchanged looks, some curious, others quietly supportive. Victor looked away, ending the conversation for the moment, but his expression had changed. The quiet confidence he once held was starting to crack. He was aware Keanu was being watched, but this time, it wasn't him who held their favor. The argument may have seemed paused, but the responses around Victor told a different tale. He was unaware that what was about to happen would force him to reevaluate everything: respect, status, power. The flight attendant passed by, gathering empty glasses. Victor appeared intent on winning the argument he had started. He smirked again and said lightly, "People who have nothing to show for themselves always talk about things like simplicity and humility. You ever notice that?" Keanu leaned forward a little, meeting his eyes. "I found that sometimes, the people who talk the most about what they have are the ones who feel the most empty inside." Victor froze for a moment. The words landed heavily. His mouth opened, then closed. No response came. Passengers exchanged glances, some clearly impressed. Keanu leaned back and added, "True success doesn't need to be shouted about. It speaks for itself." Victor finally recovered. The world is competitive. If you don't show what you've got, people ignore you. But the first-class cabin had changed. Most passengers were now fully engaged in the quiet drama unfolding. Victor felt the attention shift. An older man nearby shook his head, clearly disapproving. Victor tried again. Cheap philosophy. Sounds nice. Life doesn't operate that way. Keanu stayed calm, watching him. The real world is made by people, Victor. And how we treat others says more about us than anything we flaunt. Victor grew visibly unsettled. His dominance strategy wasn't working. Keanu wasn't reacting, and that made him feel even smaller. Victor tried crossing his arms again, but the tension was clear. Keanu broke the silence. You know, Victor, I understand the world can be competitive. But sometimes, the need to prove ourselves comes from deeper places, insecurity, even pain. Victor laughed. You couldn't be more wrong. Keanu gave a faint smile. Maybe. But I've seen people who thought success was about appearance, when really, they were chasing something they didn't have inside. Victor went silent again. He began fiddling with the wedding band on his finger, trying not to look shaken. I worked hard for everything, Victor snapped. I don't need anyone telling me how to live my life. Keanu nodded thoughtfully. I'm not saying you didn't. I'm saying we sometimes forget to ask what really matters. Victor pressed his lips tightly. Who are we? He muttered. Who are we? Keanu pointed to his chest. His voice grew firmer, but never loud. What we build without heart means nothing. I think we're defined not by what we accumulate, but by what we do for others. Victor's fists clenched. That's easy for you to say. Keanu remained composed. You're right. I don't know your story. But the truth isn't based on who we are, it's in how we choose to treat people. Victor stood up suddenly, knocking over his empty champagne glass. You think you're better than me? He yelled. Acting like you know everything, like you've lived more? Passengers went silent. The flight attendant rushed over. Keanu stayed seated, looked up slowly. I don't think I'm better. But I do think, sometimes we need to stop and ask ourselves what really matters. Victor panted, red-faced. But something about Keanu's voice made him sit back down. He avoided eye contact, clearly shaken. Silence blanketed the cabin. Then the flight attendant returned and addressed Keanu with a composed tone. Mr. Reeves, the captain asked me to let you know your connection in Tokyo is confirmed. He also sends his regards. The name echoed, Reeves. Heads turned. Murmurs started. Victor sat still. Keanu Reeves, he muttered, stunned. Keanu nodded gently. Is something wrong, Victor? Victor's face strained. He tried to speak, then stopped. Other passengers stared at him, some with judgment, some with quiet amusement. I didn't know, Victor stammered. You didn't say who you were. Keanu sighed. Didn't think it was necessary. I don't use my name as a calling card. Victor looked down, ashamed. Victor attempted to explain. Look, I didn't mean to offend you. I just didn't know who I was talking to. Keanu responded with warmth but clarity. Now that you do know this, the truth doesn't depend on who you're speaking to. It depends on how you treat them. Victor was speechless. The other passengers had now fully grasped what just unfolded. Keanu offered a final note of wisdom. Victor, life's hard enough. The last thing we need is more people tearing others down just to feel better about themselves. Victor nodded slightly, clearly changed. For the first time, he didn't argue. Keanu leaned back, conversation over. Victor sat still, absorbing every word, realizing he had revealed far more about himself than he ever intended. The man who strutted in with pride was now reflecting in silence, his own words echoing in his mind. Victor's arrogance had melted into something softer, shame, maybe even growth. He couldn't meet Keanu's eyes. The silence hurt more than any argument. Keanu read quietly, as if nothing had happened. That made the moment even heavier. As the plane landed, Victor finally whispered, I need to apologize. Not just because you're you, but because I was arrogant. I acted like an idiot. Keanu looked at him and replied, I appreciate the apology. But more than that, I hope you learn from this. Victor nodded. Sometimes what we search for most in the world is what we lack inside. Keanu added gently, I hope you understand what's truly important. Victor said nothing. But the words stuck. They would stay with him. At the terminal, Keanu quietly walked away. Fans approached for photos. He smiled, gracious as ever. Victor stood still, watching. He looked down at his hands. And for the first time in years, he felt the urge to change. Victor felt a new sense of hope that maybe this wasn't just a flight, but a wake-up call. Perhaps that encounter hadn't been a coincidence. It was an opportunity. Keanu's words still echoed inside him. True worth isn't determined by status, but by how you choose to treat others. In the end, we all make decisions that influence who we are. Are we living to please others, or to improve ourselves? Keanu's message was clear. True success isn't about what you flaunt, but about the light you leave behind. The next time you find yourself in a moment of judgment, stay calm. Stay kind. Stay grounded. Because how you treat others speaks louder than who you are. Clapperboard if this story touched you, we have many more like it. Click the screen to see more stories of hope, of kindness, and of quiet strength.